Hiya everyone. My name is Donna. A lot of people know me as the lady who says young man. And well, this is the part 2 of the Science and Fine Art of Fasting by Herbert Shelton. And it's about when you fast and about a lot of people think that it's not healthy to fast. And this book, which was written originally, I believe, in 1934, but it was updated a little bit since then from him. But when it was written, it's like 90 years ago, over 90 years ago, and it tells you that it's actually very beneficial to fast. So just give me a second while I share this with my family. I'll just be a minute. Shalom, family. Just give me a minute. I just want to share it with everyone. And it's The Science and Fine Art of Fasting by Herbert M Shelton. And it just tells us, that it's actually very good for our body to fast. And just give me a second, everyone. Okay, and I just shared it in the group. Again, this is The Science and Fine Art of Fasting by Herbert M Shelton. And we're in, hold on 1 second. We're on the initiation and duration of hibernation. That's where we're at now. And just give me a second. Initiation and duration of hibernation. In general, the time of the initiation of hibernation corresponds closely with the scarcity of food and lowering of temperature. The termination coincides with the return of favorable conditions. Some species or some individuals, however, may commence in the hibernating period while factors are still quite favorable, or may terminate the period at an unfavorable time. Modern theories of the mechanism stress the philosophical sequence of events characteristics of the process. These events may apparently be set into activity under any one of several external conditions. In temperature climates, bears eat more, especially of flesh in the fall, as they are laying up a store of food in preparation for their winter hibernation. They literally gorge themselves on food, which they convert into fat. But when they enter the dormancy period, stomach intestines are empty. Hibernating animals may be induced to awaken readily by strong external conditions. Following awakening, there is gradual elevation of body temperature and a regaining of normal physiological activity and behavioral lowering. Lowering the temperature of the body to approximately 0 degrees Celsius, which is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, has been reported to awaken the hibernating mammals, though some investigators report that animals may often be killed by freezing without awakening. Just as there are some migratory birds that do not return home until May and leave again in August, so some hibernating animals do not come out of their dark quarters for many as 7 months. Their hibernating period is one of complete fasting. In general, the period of hibernation corresponds with the period of cold and food scarcity. Metabolism during hibernation. Sorry, family. Yeah. In cold-blooded animals, nope, there we go. Come on. Sorry, it's not cooperating. Well, it is now. In cold-blooded animals, in a state of hibernation metabolism, it is almost at a complete standstill. Indeed, in some of them, as well as in frozen caterpillars, it must be a complete standstill. Not so the metabolism of warm-blooded animals. These must maintain a minimum of physiological activity and keep up a certain amount of body heat or freeze to death. At the same time, they must maintain metabolism at as low a level as is compatible with continued existence, else their food reserves may be exhausted before the end of winter, at which time they will also die of freezing. The low rate of metabolism in the hibernating bat manifests by slow respiration, slow heart action, and sluggish circulation, means a very slow use of nutrition. Slow heart action and sluggish circulation means a very slow use of nutrition. Oh, what's that? Nutritive reserves. Sorry, I did not know that word. The same slow circulation, slow heart action, and lessened rate of breathing seen in the hibernating bear also means the same slow consumption of reserves. Exhaustion of reserves before the return of warm weather would result in death from starvation. Griffin says that in spite of the low level to which the metabolic process have fallen, a hibernating bat will awaken in a few minutes if handled or even disturbed by light and talking. Once awake, the bat is as lively and active. As active as ever. His temperature, circulation, and respiration have returned to normal. Were this activity continued, exhaustive of food stores would rapidly result. He tells us that after flying around for a few minutes, they hang up again and relapse into their torpor of hibernation. Mr. Griffin tells us that the metabolic rate of an animal in hibernation depends on the temperature of his surroundings. He will burn more fat at a higher temperature. Just as any chemical reaction is speeded up by a rise in temperature, this is not good physiological, and I doubt the correctness of his statement. He himself shows that the hibernating bat may be awakened and become active, his temperature, circulation, and respiration becoming normal in spite of the low temperature of his surroundings. I think we must regard hibernation as a function of life that is vitally controlled and not absolutely determined by the temperature of the surrounding air. The control of metabolism is from within and not from without. There is a purposive conserving of food stores, not a mere passive non-use of these. We witness not a mere slowing down of chemical reactions by a lowering of temperature, but a reduction of physiological activities by a process somewhat analogues of sleep. By his own showing, these physiological activities are not helpless in the grip of temperatures. They are speeded up or slowed down by the bat in the same temperature. Mr. Griffin may be a biologist, but he talks like a chemist. He thinks of the bat in terms of test tubes, reagent bottles, retorts, etc., and not as a living organism that takes an active part in the control of its behavior. The bat is not a cold-blooded animal, and even in hibernation with metabolism reduced to the lowest point, comparable with continued life, is able to maintain a body temperature slightly higher than that of its surroundings. It is able to increase or decrease its metabolism in the same temperature. It can be active or dormant in the same temperature. Hibernation seems to be an adjustment to certain environmental conditions. The absence of food supply seems to be more important in inducing this state than the reduction of temperature, rather than a passive yielding to outside influence. The reduction of metabolism is not the result of cold, but the result of the need to conserve food reserves. Oxidation in the animal body, while a chemical process, is rigidly controlled process. The body does not start to burn and just continue to burn until it is consumed. The body's fat stores do not catch fire on hot days and go up in flames. Even in the hottest weather, the fasting animal reduces its metabolic rate and conserves its food reserves. As a matter of fact, not hibernating animals conserve their food reserves better in hot than in cold weather. This is due to the fact that more heat must be produced in cold weather to maintain normal body temperature. This chemical reaction is not speeded up by a rise in temperature. Internally, there is no rise in temperature, though the surface of the body may feel chilly, and the faster may complain of being cold even in hot weather. It would be interesting to know what is the internal temperature of the bat in hibernation. It is, no doubt, much lower than in the active bat, but the question remains to be answered: is lower temperature due to reduced metabolism, or is it lowered metabolism due to the lower temperature? If the lowering of temperature comes from without and is responsible for the reduction of metabolism, it would seem to be impossible for the bat to arouse itself to be aroused from its state of torpor by anything short of an increase of temperature, so long as the temperature of the cave is 33 degrees Fahrenheit, that of the bat should remain nearly as low, and torpor should persist. It could not fly out of its cave to see if spring has arrived, or more accurately, perhaps, to see if there is a food supply in evidence. If control is from without, the bat should be helpless until the control temperature is changed. Only the coming of warm weather should awaken him. Bats leaving a cave and flying to another where its temperature starts to drop to too low levels shows that the reduction of their metabolism is not a result of lower temperature, for if it sorry sorry family. For if it were a further lowering of temperature would further decrease metabolism and make it impossible for the bat to awaken and fly in search of a more sheltered abode. The fact that some species commence their period of hibernation while the temperature is still relatively high and food is still to be had indicates that the control of metabolism is from within, not from without. The hibernating animal is not helpless in the grip of external conditions. Aestivation. Aestivation is similar to hibernation, if indeed it is not identical with it. If hibernation is to be called winter sleep, aestivation may be with equal propriety called summer sleep. In zoology, it is defined as a state of reduced metabolic activity in which certain animals become quiescent. It is a resting interval associated with warm, dry periods in areas that have alternating wet and dry seasons. Animals are induced to aestive when drought and heat interfere with their activities. With their bent for pathological interpretations, biologists also define aestivation as the state of torpidity induced in animals by excessive dry heat. Physiological and physical quiescence should not be mistaken for a state of torpor. The same objective to calling it sleep that we made in the case of hibernation are also valid with reference to aestivation. Shalom, family. Aestivation is seen chiefly in the tropics during the long, hot, dry season, when food is scarce and vegetation is taking rest. A few animals in the temperate zones, especially in the desert regions, also aestivate. Alligators, snakes, certain mammals, as taric insects and land snails become dormant. During the dry season in the tropics, the pools and the streams dry up. The crocodiles aestivate in summer, sleeping through the dry season without feeding or emerging from the mud in which they have buried themselves. It is said that they are able to sleep in this almost lifeless state for a whole year. The alligators, the American division of the crocodile family, hibernate in the country very much like frogs, but in the tropics they aestivate. When water is no longer obtainable in the South American alligator and some other animals bury themselves in the mud, reduce their physiological activities to a bare minimum, while the earth above them is baked into a hard crust. When the rains come again, they resume activity and come forward renewed by their long fast and rest. Certain fish are able, when the pools and streams dry up, to burrow deep down into the mud and lie there until the coming of the rainy season. The mudfish of Australia is an example of these fish, but many examples exist in the dry, arid countries where summer rather than winter is the hard time. Indeed, if we are to judge by the fish that may be found in a dry pond after a heavy rain, we may have such fish in this country. The fishes, Protoparis of Africa and Lepidosaurin of South America live in mud cocoons during the dry season, when the rice fields which it inhabits dry up during the drought. The spearhead fish Ophiopsophidae, sorry, I butchered that, buries itself in the mud. Natives of Indo-Malaya fish for these animals with digging implements. The African lungfish digs its mud almost 2 feet, curls its tail around its body, which becomes covered with mucus, and there exists, drawing air through a lung tube and living on the breakdown of body fat and tail. During droughts, planarians, flatworms, and leeches, annelids, bury themselves in the mud. Small crustaceans, mollusks, etc., that are found in the pools and the patches of water that frequently form in the desert bury themselves deep in the clay or baked mud. When these pools dry up and activate for long periods, turtles activate in mud, while lizards and snakes retire to crevices. The Iberian water turtle hides under rocks. Frogs burrow into mud and exist for months in its sun-baked hardness. During the period of aestivation, frogs can survive the loss of half their body moisture. Certain Australian frogs become discontented with water during the water season and use this stored water during the aestivating period. This storing of water by these frogs is similar to the storage of fat by hibernating animals. Birds are not known to activate, but a number of mammals such as aardvark, Orestopus, and some lemurs, Chirogal, Millie, and Microbus, undergo periods of quiescence. Most prominent among aestivating animals of America are the land snails, although frogs, slugs, and fishes and other aquatic and semi-aquatic animals also aestivate. When the dry season comes, land snails secrete a membrane-like substance, epiphysin, across the opening of their shells, leaving a small opening for the emission of air in breathing. Some snails secrete several diaphragms across the opening of their shells. There is an Australian snail that plugs the mouth of its shells with morsels of clay before entering upon its period of aestivation. After a prolonged shower, snails become active. Aestivating desert snails have been known to revive and crawl after years in the dormant state. Records show that the African snail Helix desertorum may remain in aestivation as long as 5 years. The California desert snail Helix fetichi has become active after 6 years aestivation period. In the deserts of the world, there are many plant-eating animals that lie dormant in times of drought, when vegetation is more scarce than during those periods when there is rainfall. There are many desert plants that also lie dormant during periods of drought. Both plants and animals fast during the period of dormancy. In Australia, the nymphs of a species of dragonflies aestivate in dry land. Slugs bury themselves in the ground and bivalve mollusks in the mud. Small crustaceans, mollusks, etc., that are found in the pools and patches of water that frequently form in the deserts bury themselves deeply in the clay of baked mud. When these pools dry up and aestivate for long periods, while it seems that the heat, dryness, and lack of food are the factors that induce aestivation, as cold and famine seem to induce hibernation, there is reason to believe that there is more to the practice than the mere existence of certain external The name of the book is in the title, The Science and Fine Art of Fasting. But who knew plants fasted? Factors. For example, the persistence of the aestivating habit is illustrated by the Tenri, which is a temperate zoological garden where food and water are abundant. Aestivates at the time of their scarcity, as in its native Madagascar. This would seem to indicate that something other than scarcity of food and temperature is at work in aestivation and perhaps also in hibernation. A peculiar example of an animal that behaves opposite to aestivation is the Egyptian droba. It is said to be so closely adapted to dry conditions of the desert that the rain or damp atmosphere induce it to pass into a dormant condition, in which state it does not eat. How long can animals abstain from food? Also, in the other live that I did earlier, it talks about dogs that went I think 21 days without food and they healed. I mean, even our little animals, our bodies are made to heal. So when you fast, you're going to do it for the Most High, but your body's actually going to heal. So that's like an added bonus that a lot of people are afraid of. And that's why I can't show the book because of copyright reasons. But The Science and Fine Art of Fasting, Herbert M Shelton, it was initially, he wrote it in 1934. So that's why I'm reading it. But got a little bit more to go, and then we're going to get to the good stuff. But yeah. How long can animals abstain from food? The most remarkable records of continued abstinence from food are to be found among the lower animals. Compared to some of these, man is a picker. It is often said that the marvels of long continued abstinence from food reach their maximum in the winter sleep of several species of warm-blooded animals. But there are actually longer records than these present. The recently produced American People's Encyclopedia tells us that the survival time in acute starvation, complete abstinence from all foods, save water, ranges from 21 to 117 days in dogs, rats 5 to 6 days, guinea pigs 7 to 8 days, rabbits 15 days, cats 20 days, dogs 38 days. There is some confusion about how long the dog may survive deprivation of food, although the matter of size may determine the duration. Reports of spiders undergoing incredibly long fasts, spinning webs daily. These made of substances within their bodies until the weight of the webs so produced far outweigh the weights of the spider at the beginning of the fast, caused me to suspect that the spiders have sources of food supply of which the observers were unaware. I find it difficult to believe that spiders have mastered the art of making something out of nothing. Even one-celled organisms, amoeba, paramecia, etc., can exist without food for from 4 to 21 days, like muscle cells in a fasting man. Fasting one-celled organisms only undergo a diminution in the size of the cell. These die only after the cellular reserve is exhausted. These little beings possess a food reserve which they can live on in emergencies. In the same way, each cell in the bodies of the higher animals possess its own private food reserve. Among vertebrae, the time they can subsist without food ranges from a few days in small birds and mammals to possibly years in some reptiles. The time they can go without food depends on the amount of reserve possessed and the rate at which it is consumed. In cold-blooded animals, the reserves are usually plentiful and the demand made upon them is small, so that they may fast for long intervals without being forced to renew their stores. In warm-blooded animals, whose reserves are frequently lower and whose great activities make a greater demand upon these, the reserves are more rapidly depleted. Among cold-blooded animals, and their survival time without food is usually much greater than among warm-blooded animals, since the former do not have to burn fuel. In order to maintain a high body temperature, snakes and other reptiles easily go for long periods without food. Snakes have been kept alive without food for almost 2 years. A python is Um, a python in captivity has been observed to go without food for a period of 13 months. Frogs have survived 16 months and fishes 20 months without food. Invertebrates can stand even longer periods of deprivation. The larvae of the beetle Trochderma tarsale living for 5 years, during which time they lost 99.8% of their body substance. Spiders have been observed to exist without food for 17 months and more. Faber tells us of certain spiders that they eat no food of any kind for the first 16 months of their lives, but feast upon sunbeams. Goldfishes amphibians has been known to live for years without food. In his research, Sir Lenation of Chaussat tells us that the land of tortoise of southern France can starve for a year without betraying a reduction of vital energy, and the Proteus anguinus, the serpent salamander, even for a year and a half, providing the temperature of its cage is kept above the freezing point. Rhine salmon have been known to go without food for 8 to 15 months. Oswald says reptiles, with their small expenditure of vital energy, can easily survive dietetic deprivation, but bears and badgers with an organization essentially analogous to that of the human species, and with the circulation of blood active enough to maintain the temperature of our bodies more than 100 degrees above that of the winter storms, dispense with food for periods varying from 3 to 5 months, and at the termination of their ordeal, emerging from their dens in the full possession of their physical and mental energies. Fasting, hydropathy, and exercise, pages 60 to 61, the condor, like all other vultures, is able to fast for days. It usually gorges itself, however, when it does get food. Edwin E. Slosson, M.S., Ph.D., Director of Science Services, Washington, says in his Keeping Up with Science, page 261, among the lower animals, existence under inanition may extend over incredibly protracted periods. Scorpions are known to have starved for 368 days, and spiders have survived starvation for 17 months. The larvae of small beetles have been known to live through more than 5 years without food, their body mass being reduced in this time to only 1/600 of what it was at the start. There is a unique record of a freshwater fish, Amia calva, which fasted 20 months and even then had not apparently reached the end of the rope, but was killed. Frogs survive starvation for 16 months, and snakes remain alive even after 2 years of fasting. The longest record of fast endured by a dog was 117 days, or nearly 4 months. A.S. Pierce, professor of zoology at Duke University, tells us that certain ticks can exist in an active state for as long as 4 years without eating anything. Ugh. Perhaps the longest period of abstinence are seen in acivating animals of the desert. It should not be overlooked also that snails and other animals of northern deserts that activate in the dry season and hibernate through the winter spend most of their lives fasting. Fasting as a means of survival. After this survey of the many and varied conditions under which animals fast and the different uses of which fasting is put, it becomes obvious that fasting is one of the most common phenomenon in nature. It is second only to feeding and reproduction, with both of which phenomena it is allied in importance and in breadth of application. Fasting under so many different conditions is so common in natural and is employed as a means of meeting so many of the exigencies of life that I am forced to wonder why anyone is afraid to fast and why anyone should doubt its naturalness and helpfulness. It is one of nature's best established methods of dealing with certain physiological problems. The hibernating bear, the escaping alligator, the sick elephant, the wounded dog, these all fast to meet the problem before them. Fasting in acute disease, when there is no digestive power, can be viewed only as a very useful means of adaptation. As I have previously pointed out, biologically, hibernation is a means of adaptation to the conditions of winter, which enables the animal to survive. The ability to go without food during this period is an important element in survival. Except for its ability to fast for extended periods, the hibernating animal would starve to death during the winter. Our so-called scientists, sticklers as they are for classification and minute differentiations, are still in the habit of referring to all abstinence from food as starvation. But they say a hibernation that is the form of starvation that spells survival instead of death. Strangely enough, these men refer to the abstinence of hibernation, and that's seen in the mating season in some animals as physiological starvation. This is a misuse of terms. Starvation is at all times pathological or pathogenic. The ability of an animal to fast, even for long periods under many and various conditions and circumstances for life, is a vitally important factor in survival. It is nature's best established method of dealing with certain physiological and biological problems. It may be properly regarded as a means of adjustment of adaptation. The hibernating bear, the activating alligator, the sick elephant, all fasting to meet problems before them. If an animal can fast, it is only because it can rely upon adequate internal resources, and it can afford to fast precisely insofar and so long as it duly conserves these provisions. This is the reason hibernating and activating animals function on the lowest physiological level compatible with continued life, with no physical activity and only a bare minimum of physiological activity. Therein the internal reserves are conserved and made to last for prolonged periods, months, or a year. Salmon and the first seal bull do not rest, and they make no effort to conserve their resources. It would be interesting to know how long these animals could fast if they ceased their activity, physical and sexual. Fasting during the mating season probably serves some very useful purpose. We know at least that in the case of certain very low forms of life, it restores the male after several generations of parthogenic reproduction. For best results, animals that fast during the mating season seem to require a reduction of surfeit. They purchase rejuvenescence by curbing their anti-symbiotic propensities and abandoning conditions of surfeit. Instability resulting from the surfeit and illegitimate food can be gotten rid of, and stability regained only by a return to moderation and appropriate food for immediate results. Abstinence from food is essential. Reinheimer thinks that fasting has the effort of assisting towards a reestablishment of a tolerable degree of domestic symbiosis, both for ordinary physiological as well as for genetic purposes. In the cases where domestic symbiosis is in danger of becoming perverted by the particular organism's transgression against the laws of biological symbiosis. I have made no effort to exhaust the list of animals and plants that fast under conditions other than those of sickness or absence of food. The examples that have been given are sufficient to show that naturally has no fear of prolonged abstinence from food, and the abstinence is frequently made use of in nature by animals in both the active and the dormant states as a means of adapting the animal to various conditions of life, or as a means of internal alterations when this is needed. Under all conditions in which animals fast, the internal resources of the animal are drawn upon to nourish the vital tissues and carry on the indispensable functions of life. In sickness, or when severely wounded, when no food can be digested, the organism also draws upon its internal store of supplies for these same purposes. Fever, pain, distress, inflammation suspend the secretion of the digestive juices. Fever, pain inhibit the muscular actions of the stomach and take away the desire for food. In such conditions, there is but one source from which food can be drawn, the reserves. In sickness, as in animals fasting through the mating period, there is much activity going on in the body. There is therefore much more rapid wasting of the body in these two conditions than it is seen hibernation and aestivation. Viewing the wasted condition of animals at the end of their various fasting period, it becomes very obvious that while different species of animals vary in the amount of loss they can safely sustain, none of them are injured or endangered until after a long percentage of the normal weight of the body has been lost. There is therefore no danger in a fast of such length as are employed in sickness. Shalom, everyone. We're on chapter 3 now, fasting in man. Man is an animal, and as such is subject to the same laws of existence and the same conditions of living as are other animals. As part of the great organic world, he is not being that is set apart from the ordinary and regular conditions of life governed by different laws and requirements of existence. It is not surprising, therefore, that we find man not only able to fast for prolonged periods and to do so with benefits, but also find him fasting under a wide variety of circumstances, a wide variety of circumstances and for a wide variety of purposes. In the following pages, we shall briefly review the most important of the conditions under which man fasts and the purpose for which he fasts. Sorry. I didn't realize it goes black. Sorry, family. Religious fasting. Well, we're doing it for Yahuwah, not, you know how we are. Okay. Fasting as a religious observance, has long been practiced for, hold on, I'm going to do it this way. It's going to be easier. Sorry. Fasting as a religious observance has long been practiced for the accomplishment of certain goods. Religious fasting is of early origin, antedating recorded history. Partial or entire abstinence from food or from certain kinds of food, as stated seasons, prevailed in Assyria, Persia, Babylon, Scythia, Greece, Rome, India, Nineveh, Palestine, China, in Northern Europe, among the Druids, and in the American, among the Indians. It was a widely diffused practice, often indulged as a mean of penitence in mourning and as a preparation for participation in religious rites, such as baptism and communion. At the very dawn of civilization, the ancient mysteries, a secret worship or wisdom religion that flourished for the 1,000 years in Egypt, India, Greece, Persia, Thrace, Scandinavia, and the Gothic and Celtic nations, prescribed and practiced fasting. The Druidical religion among the Celtic peoples required a long probationary period of fasting and prayer before the candidate could advance. A fast of 50 days was required in the Mithraic religion in Persia. Indeed, fasting was common to all the mysteries, which were all quite similar to the Egyptian mysteries and were probably derived from these. Moses, who was learned in all the wisdom of Egypt, is said to have fasted for more than 100 days on Mount Sinai. The mysteries of Tyre, which were represented in Judea in the days of Yahusha, in a secret society known as the Essenes, also prescribed fasting in the 1st century AD. These existed in Alexandria, Egypt, and ascetic sect of Yehuda called Therapeutae, who resembled the Essenes, who borrowed much from the Kabbalah and but from the Kabbalah and from the from the Pythagorean and Orphic systems. These Therapeutae gave great attention to the sick and held fasting in high esteem as a curative measure. Fasting is mentioned quite frequently in Scripture, while several fasts of considerable duration are recorded therein, as Moses 40 days, Exodus 24:18, Exodus 34:28, Elijah 40 days, 1 Kings 19:8, David 7 days, 2 Samuel 12:20, Yahusha 40 days, Matthew 4:2, Luke, I fast twice in the week, Luke 18:12. This kind cometh not out save by prayer and fasting. Matthew 17:21. A fast throughout all Judea. 2 Chronicles 28. The scripture cautions against fasting for mere notoriety. Matthew 6:17 and 18. It also advises fasters not to wear a sad countenance. Matthew 6:16. But to find pleasure in fasting and to perform one's work. Isaiah 58:3. And the certain fast shall be fast of gladness. Zechariah 8:19. We may very properly assume that some great good was the object of the many fasts mentioned in Scripture, even though we may be sure that they were not always intended for the cure of disease. We may also be sure that the ancient had no fear of starving to death by missing a few meals. For 2,000 years, the Christian religion has recommended prayer and fasting. And the story of 40-day fast in the wilderness has been told from thousands of pulpits. Religious fasts were frequently practiced in the early days of Christianity and during the Middle Ages. Thomas Campanella tells us that frail nuns often sought relief from attacks of hysteria by fasting. 7 times 70 hours, or 20½ days. John Calvin and John Wesley both strongly urged fasting as a beneficial measure for both ministers and people. Among the early Christians, fasting was among the rites of purification. Fasting is yet a regular practice among the nation of the Far East, especially among the Eastern Indians. The many fasts of Gandhi are generally known. Penance-worn members of the early church frequently retired to the desert for a month or two to fight down temptations. They would drink water from some dilapidated old cistern during the period, but to eat so much as a millet seed was considered a breach of their vows and destroyed the merits of their penance. At the end of the second month, the gaunt world renouncers generally had sufficient strength to return home unassisted. The writer of Peregrino Silvae is in describing how Lent was observed in Jerusalem when she was there about 386 AD, said, "They abstained entirely from all food during Lent, except on Saturdays and Sundays. They took a meal at midday on Sunday, and after that they took nothing until Saturday morning. This was their rule through Lent." Although the Catholic Church has no law requiring fasting, as we use the term, it was voluntarily practiced by many individuals in the past. Fasting, whether total abstinence from food or abstinence from a prescribed food, is regarded by this church as a penance. The Catholic Church also teaches that Yahusha fasted in order to instruct and encourage belief in the practice of penance. The Roman Catholic Church has both fast days and abstinence days, though they are not necessarily the same. The law of abstinence is on a different basis. On a different basis, and is regulated not by the quantity but by the quality of food permitted. The law of abstinence forbids the use of meat or meat broth, but not eggs, lactina, milk, or condiments of any kind, even from the fat of animals. The rule of the church in fasting is: what constitutes fasting is the taking of only one full meal in a day. In earlier times, a strict fast was kept until sunset. Now, Now this full meal may be taken anytime after midday, or as the church's approved. Hold on, sorry family, I'm here. I'm just trying to get it where I can read it. I don't remember where I was, so I'll just start. Okay. What constitutes fasting is the taking of only one full meal in a day. In earlier times, a strict fast was kept until sunset. Now, this full meal may be taken anytime after midday, or, as the church's approved authors hold, shortly before. Some even hold that the full meal may be taken at any time during the 24 hours, but this one full meal is 24 hours. Does not prohibit the taking of some food in the morning and evening. Indeed, local custom, which is often a somewhat undefined phrase as determined by the local bishop, determines what extra food may be taken daily. In America, the rule is that the morning meal should not exceed 2 ounces of bread. In Westminster, England, the limit is 3 ounces. Obviously, a fast of this nature is not what we mean by fasting, for a man may eat enough in this manner to grow fat, nor can hygienists accept the so-called moral principle, of the Roman Church. Pavum pro nihilo repitunar, and ne potus nos knock eat. A little is reckoned as nothing. Less drink unaccompanied by anything solid should be harmful. We hold, as Page expressed it, the little driblet meals are not fasting. The Lenten fast of Catholics is also merely a period of abstinence from certain prescribed foods. Although there are Catholics who take advantage of the period for a real fast. The early practice of fasting until sundown and feasting is similar to the practice of Mohammedans in their so-called fast of Ramadan. During this season, the people do not eat any and cannot drink wine nor smoke cigarettes from sunrise to sunset. But they have their cigarettes handy, ready to, sorry, family. But my mom smoked and she loves her cigarette. That's why I'm laughing, because it reminds me of my mama. But they have their cigarettes handy, ready to begin smoking as soon as the sun goes down, and they enjoy a night of feasting. A grand carouse at night makes up for their abstinence during the day. Their cities hold nightly carnivals, the restaurants are lighted, and the streets are filled with revelers. The bazaars are well illuminated, and the peddlers of lemonade and sweetmeats are in their glory. The wealthy sit up all night receiving and returning calls and giving dinner parties. After 40 days of this feasting and reveling, the people celebrate the end of their month of fasting with the feasting of Bairam. At the present time, Christians of all sects and denominations rarely undergo real fasts. Most fasts of Roman, Eastern Orthodox, and Protestant communicants are merely periods of abstinence from flesh foods, abstinence from flesh foods other than fish on fast days appears to have been enjoyed merely to aid the fishing and shipbuilding industries. Among the Jews, fasting always means entire abstinence from food, and at least one of their fast days carries with it abstinence from water also. Their period of fasting are accompanied only short ones. While the Hindu nationalist leaders, Gandhi, fully understood the hygienic value of the fast and often fasted for hygienic purposes, most of his fasts were purification or penance fasts and political weapons by which he compelled England to accede to his demands. He even fasted for the purification of India and not merely for his own cleansing. Fasting formed part of the religious observances of the Aztecs and Toltecs of Mexico, the Incas of Peru, and other American tribes. Fasting was also practiced by the Pacific Islanders, while there are traces of fasting in China and Japan, even before their contact with Buddhism. In Eastern Asia and wherever Brahmanism and Buddhism have spread, fasting has been kept alive. Fasting as, well, I don't like the word, but yeah, magic. I don't use magic. Hold on one second. Sorry, family. With fasting as MAGIC, we have nothing to do except to study the phenomenon. Tribal fast is seen among the American Indians to avert some threatened calamity, or fasting, as by Gandhi to purify India. is the use of fasting as MAGIC. Fasting was widely observed both in private and public ceremonials by the American Indians. Fathers of newborn children are required to fast among the Melanesians. Fasting was often part of the rite of initiation into manhood and womanhood, or for sacred and ritual acts among many tribes of people. David's 12 days fast, as recorded in Scripture while his son was ill, was a magic fast. Ceremonial fasting carried out in several religions may properly be classed as MAGIC fasting. If we carefully distinguish between magic fasting and Protestant fasting, as in hunger strikes, we may say that magic fasting is fasting undergone to achieve some desired and outside the person of the faster. We are interested in such fast simply as another part of the evidence that man, like the lower animals, may fast for extended periods and may do so not only without harm but with positive benefits. Yes, I know this is in Scripture. That's why in the title I said that it was for fasting for those that are afraid to do fasting, because in Scripture it does say when you fast. So no, this is not Scripture. This is just reading a book that's called The Science and Fine Art of Fasting by Herbert Shelton. It talks about how animals fast, how plants fast, and it's about to get into about how it's actually good for human beings to fast and that it is safe. And I already did read Jeremiah. Tomorrow night I'm going to be doing Ezekiel. I'll also be reading this book tomorrow, probably earlier in the day if I don't get, unless I get sidetracked with something else that I have to do. But I'll be going into Ezekiel tomorrow. And this fast, that will be tomorrow night. But right now I'm reading this because it is important. I mean, fasting is very, very, very important. And there are so many members of this. Oh, wait, camera's not even on me. Sorry, family. Never mind. And so many people want to fast, but they're afraid of fasting. And that's why I'm just trying to help people, because when you fast, I don't know if you have ever done a prolonged water fast or not, but truly, I can't even describe the benefits. Like, you'll see for yourself and you'll be so thankful you did it once you realize that it's totally safe. I mean, if you have to if you're on medicines and all, do that, talk to a doctor. But for the most part, this book talks about, this book is over 90 years old, and it talks about how it is safe to fast. And no, this isn't Scripture study, and I thought I put it in the header that it was about fasting, but I'm sorry if you're upset that it is not Scripture study. No, it's not really. And so I'm just trying to help some of the family out. And if I got sidetracked earlier today, and that's why I wanted to do this earlier in the day, but I got sidetracked, and so that's why I read it, and I was still in the animal part, so I wanted to get to the human part, and that's why I continued. But yeah, sorry. Sorry. Love you guys. I'm just trying to help people out. That's all I'm trying to do. That's it. Okay, family, we'll get back. Love you guys. Okay, disciplining fast. Major W.C. Gottschall, M.S., says, there is nothing new about fasting. Among the ancients, it was recognized as sovereign method of attaining and maintaining marketed mental and physical efficiency. Socrates and Plato, two of the greatest of the Greek philosophers and teachers, fasted regularly for a period of 10 days at a time. I know that word. Pythagoras, another of the Greek philosophers, was also a regular faster, and before he took an examination of the University of Alexandria, fasted for 40 days. He required his pupils to fast for 40 days before they could even could enter his class. H.B. Cushman tells us in his History of Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Natchez Indians that the Choctaw warrior and hunter often indulge in protracted fasts to train him to endure hunger. Thank you, Brandy. I love you too, sis. Thank you. I love you guys, all of y'all. Thank you. I just feel bad because somebody thought it was scripture. Well, I mean, it is, it is very knowledgeable, especially for the people that are afraid. Periodic and yearly fast. Luke mentions in his gospel the practice of fasting one day out of each week, which seems to have been very general in his day. Periodic fasting has been practiced by many different peoples and by many different individuals. It is asserted that the ancient Egyptians were accustomed to fasting for a brief period, about 2 weeks each summer. Many people of today do the same thing. They have a fast or 2 fasts each year. Others follow the custom referred to by Luke and fast 1 day out of each week. Others fast 3 or 5 days out of each month. The practice of periodic fasting takes more forms with many different individuals. These fasts are usually but short duration, but they are always of distinct benefits. About that, family, for me, after like the 3rd day, you really can, like, you'll get euphoria and everything. I mean, you will never feel closer to the Most High, and each day that you're in, you just get closer and closer and closer and closer. So, I mean, yeah, you'd be really surprised. And even like the average, like, quote unquote thin person, they still have 100,000 calories of fat on their body. So you're not going to mess with muscle. You'd have to be on it for like months, you know what I mean? Like a couple of months, even if you're thin, to lose muscle mass. And also, yeah, but he'll go into it in this book. But yeah, okay, sorry. Squirrel. Love you guys. Hunger strikes. Hunger strikes have become very frequent during the past 30 years. Perhaps the most famous of these have been the protest fast of Gandhi and the hunger strike of McSweeney and his co-political prisoner in Cork, Ireland in the 1920s. Joseph Mercy, who went on the hunger strike with McSweeney, died on the 68th day of his fast, McSweeney on the 74th day. Older readers will perhaps recall that some years ago, when the suffragettes of England would go on hunger strikes, they would be forcibly fed by a painful process, while at the same time there was much talk of letting them starve in prison. Gandhi's frequent fasts were usually protests against some British policy, although sometimes he fasted to purify India because of some wrongs she had committed. He was, however, fully acquainted with the hygienic value of the fast and was fully conversant in the literature on the subject. His longest fast seemed to have been about 21 days. Many men and women in all parts of the world have staged hunger strikes of longer or shorter duration. Exhibition or stunt fast. There have been a number of fasts who were more or less professional fasters, the fasting largely for show and making money out of the process. These have fasted publicly and have charged admission to the public to get to see them. On such were Succi and Merlati, 2 Italian exhibition fasters, and Jacques. Jacques fasted 42 days in London in 1890 and 50 days in the same city in 1891. He fasted 30 days in Edinburgh in 1889. Merlati fasted 50 days in Paris in 1885. Sushi took several long fasts ranging from 21 to 46 days. One of his fasts was carefully studied by Professor Luciani, famous Italian authority on nutrition. Experimental fast. Experimental fasts in which men and women have taken part are perhaps more numerous than we think. Professors Carlson and Kunde of the University of Chicago made a few experiments of this nature a few years ago. Their fasts were relatively short durations. At the time, I believe that Dr. Carlson is conducting experiments with the fast, and he is said to take occasional short fasts himself. But few experimental fasts of considerable duration have been made in man. Dr. Luigi Luciani, professor of physiology in the University of Rome, studied a 30-day fast undergone by Suchi in 1889. Victor Pashutin, director of the Imperial Military Medical Academy, Petrograd, Russia, performed a number of experiments upon animals and investigated cases of death from starvation in man and published the results of his research in his pathological physiological of inanition. Dr. Francis Gano Benedict of the Carnegie Institute of Roxbury, Massachusetts, published a book some years ago entitled The Metabolism of Inanition, in spite of the care observed in the conduct of his fasting experiments and the skills with which the various tests and measurements were carried out. Very few decisive results came from these experiments, for they were based on short fast, the longest one of 7 days having been that of a hypochondriac who, according to Tusek, being abnormal, could not produce normal physiological results. It is also true that the first few days of the fast witnessed to worse troubles, so that the results of the short fast were very misleading. As Professor Levanzin says, the great book on which the Carnegie Institute squandered $6,000 is not worth the paper on which it was printed. Benedict's discussion of past experiments with the fast is devoted to fast in healthy subjects, and this can throw but little light on the importance of the fast in disease. In 1912, Professor Agostino Levanzin of Malta came to America to be studied by Professor Benedict. While he underwent a fast of 31 days duration, his fast was commenced on April 13, 1912, at a weight of less than 2 pounds over 132 pounds normal weight, according to the Yale University measurements. My height being 5 feet 6.5 inches. Levanzin thinks that this is an important point in every fast. He points out that professional fasters, like hibernating animals, generally overeat before they start fasting and accumulate a good store of fat and other reserves. He thinks that due to this fact, the long fasts previously studied were of destruction of adipose tissue and not of the whole body. He attempted to avoid this mistake by starting his fast at normal body weight. It was his opinion that the length of the fast is of no importance. It is not if it's not started from normal body weight. He was of the opinion that man can lose 6% of his body weight without any risk of death or damage to his health. He says that the greatest part of the normal body weight is also a storage of food. At the out, oh, sorry. At the outset of my fast, my exact weight was a shade over 133.5 pounds, 60.6 kilograms. At the conclusion of the 31 days of my fast, I weighed barely 104.5 pounds, 47.4 kilograms, a total loss of 29 pounds during the fast. Throughout the fast, tests were taken of my pulse rate, blood pressure, respiration rate, respiration volume, blood examination, anthropomedical measurements, urine analysis, and growth of hair, not to mention innumerable other observations of my mental and physical condition from day to day. Fasting when eating is impossible. There are pathological conditions under which eating is impossible, such conditions as cancer of the stomach, destruction of the stomach by acids, and by other causes renders it no longer possible to take food. Persons in this condition often go for extended periods without food before they finally die. A few such cases will be mentioned in the text as we proceed with our studies. In certain conditions of gastric neurosis, foods is vomited about as fast as it is swallowed, or it is passed into the small intestines with almost equal rapidity and hurried to the exit and expelled without being digested. Such an individual, though eating is to all practical purposes going without food, such a state of affairs may last for an extended period. Shipwrecked sailors and passengers. Shipwrecked sailors and aviators forced down at sea have in many instances been forced to exist for long periods without food and often without water. Many have survived long periods without food under the many severe conditions that the sea offers. During the recent war, many instances of this nature received much publicity. In my debut as a literary person, Mark Twain, seriously in this instance, records some of his experiences with an observation of fasting. He says, "A little starvation can really do more for the average sick man than can the best of medicine and the best of doctors. I do not mean restricted diet. I mean total abstinence from food 1 or 2 days. I speak from experience. Starvation has been my cold and fever doctor for 15 years and has accompanied a cure in all instances. The third mate told me in Honolulu that Porthaiji has lain in his hammock for months, raising his family of abscesses and feeding like a cannibal. We have seen that in spite of dreadful weather, deprivation of sleep, scorching, drenching, and all manner of miseries, 13 days of starvation wonderfully recovered him. There were 4 sailors down sick when the ship was burned. 25 days of pitiless starvation have followed, and now we have this curious record. All men are hardy and strong. Even the ones that were down sick are well, except poor Pete. When I wrote an article some months ago urging temporary abstinence from food as a remedy for an inactive appetite and for disease. I was accursed of jesting, but I was in earnest. We are all wonderfully well and strong, comparatively speaking. On this day, the starvation regimen drew its belt a couple of buckle holes tighter. The bread ration was reduced from the usual piece of cracker the size of a silver dollar to half of that, and one meal was abolished from the daily 3. This will weaken the men physically, but if there are any diseases of the ordinary sort left in them, they will disappear. Entomb miners. Frequently, when there are mine cave-ins, one or more miners are entombed for shorter or longer periods, during which time they are without food and often without water. Their survival until they can be rescued depends not upon food, but upon air. If the oxygen supply is exhausted before rescuers reach them, they perish, otherwise they survive days without food. The entombed miner is like the animal buried for days and weeks under a snowdrift. He is able to go for prolonged periods without food and survive just as are these animals. Fasting in illness. It is estimated that fasting for the alleviation of human suffering has been practiced uninterruptedly for 10,000 years. No doubt it has been employed from the time man first began to get sick. Fasting was part of the methods of healing practiced in the ancient Asclepian temple of Tuscud, Guido, 1300 years before the time of Yahusha. Hippocrates, the mythical Greek father of physics, seems to have prescribed total abstinence from food while a disease was on the increase, and especially at the critical period, and a spare diet on other occasions. Tertullian has left us treatises on fasting written about 200 AD. Plutarch said, instead of using medicine, rather fast a day. Avicenna, the Greek Arab physician, often prescribed fasting for 3 weeks or more. I think that there is no room to doubt that man, like a lower animal, has always fasted when acutely ill. In more modern times, the medical profession has taught that the sick that they must eat to keep up their strength, and that if they do not eat, their resistance will be lowered and they will lose strength. The thought behind all of this is that unless the sick eat, they are likely to die. The reverse of this is the truth. The more they eat, the more likely they are to die. It is eating for strength. M. L. Holbrook, an outstanding hygienist of the last century, says, fasting is no cunning trick of priestcraft, but the most powerful and safest of all medicines. When animals are sick, they refuse food. Only when they are well and not only when they are well and not before they resume eating. It is as natural or normal for man to refuse food when sick as for animals to do so. His natural repulsion to food is a safe guide to not eating. The aversion and dislike of the sick, especially to food, noise, motion, light, clothes, air, etc., are not to be lightly dismissed. They express protective measures of the sick body. Famine and war. War and famine, whether the famine has been produced by drought, insect, pests, floods, tornadoes, earthquakes, and freezes, snows have frequently deprived whole populations of food for extended periods, so that they have been forced to fast. In many of these instances, they have been limited food supplies, but in others, no food has been available for long periods. The ability of man to fast, even for long periods, proves to be, as with the lower animals, an important means of survival under such circumstances. Such prolonged periods of deprivation were much more frequent in past ages than today. when rapid transportation and modern means of communication make it possible to get food to people in famine districts in a very short time. Fasting under emotional stress. Grief, worry, anger, shock, and other emotional irritations are almost as potent in suspending the desire for food and in rendering digestive practically impossible as are pain, fever, and severe inflammation. An excellent example of this is that the young lady in New York who a few years ago attempted to drown herself and who explained when rescued by two sailors that when her sweetheart, who had been in port 2 days, had not called to see her nor communicated with her, she thought she had been jilted. Her sailor friend kept on duty and not having opportunity to communicate with her was permitted to see her. He asked when she had eaten, and she replied, "Not since yesterday, Bill. I couldn't." Her grief of the sense of loss had resulted in a suspension of digestive secretion and a loss of desire for food. Fasting by the insane. The insane commonly manifest a strong aversion to food, and unless forcibly fed, will often go for extended periods without eating. It is customary in institutions devoted to the care of mentally ill to force feed such patients, often very cruel by very cruel means. This aversion to food by the insane is undoubtedly an instinctive move in the right direction. In his Natural Cure, pages 140 to 143, Dr. Page presents a very interesting account of a patient that recovered normal mental health. Wow, normal mental health by fasting 41 days after other treatments had miserably failed. One case of insanity in a young man who came under my care refused food for 39 days, resuming eating on the morning of the 40th day of fasting, greatly improved in mental condition. I have used fasting in other cases of mental disease and have no doubt that fasting is distinctly beneficial, and I am convinced that when the insane patient refuses food, this is an instinctive measure designed to assist the body in reconstructive work. Wow, wow. Wow. Hibernation in man. Of possible human hibernation, it has been said that it is a condition utterly inexplicable on any principle taught in the schools. Nonetheless, there are a number of peoples who practice a near approach to hibernation during the winter season. This is true of the Eskimos of northern Canada, as well as of certain tribes of northern Russia. By putting on fat and wintering very much as does the bear, only much less completely. The Eskimo reveals that man has some hibernating power. By keeping warm, usually by huddling together in the home and moving very, very little, he goes through the long winter on half the usual food. At the onset of winter, the Eskimo will sew himself up in his fur-lined parka, leaving accessible openings for certain physiological necessities, and will stay in his hut for the duration of the winter, existing on dried salmon, hardtack ground corn cakes, and water. The fact that he undertakes very little physical activity reduces the amount of energy spent, thus aiding him in sustaining the food reserves accumulated in his body at a level at which there is no danger of systemic detriment. Certain Russian peasants of the Sakov region had been known to sleep around a fire during most of the winter, awakening once daily to eat. There is no evidence that this is anything other than a quasi-hibernation, as they employ fire to keep themselves warm, awaken daily to eat, and should not be forgotten, it is easily possible to take all the food required by an even active life in one meal daily. Reports that certain Indian fakers have been able to assume a dormant state and survive burial for a year or more must be treated with skepticism. Instinctive fasting. Fasting above all other measures can lay claim to a very strictly natural method. There can be no doubt that it is the oldest of all measures of meeting those crises in the organism called disease. It is much older than the human race itself, since it is resorted to instinctively by sick and wounded animals. The fasting cure instinct, says Oswald, is not limited to our dumb fellow creatures. It is common experience that pain, fevers, gastric congestions, and even mental affliction take away the appetite, and the only unwise nurses will try to thwart the purpose of nature in this respect. The doctrine of total depravity taught men to distrust the promptings of their natural instincts. And while the doctrine is slowly fading from religion, it is as strong as ever in medicine. The promptings of instinct are ignored, and the sick are stuffed with good nourished food to keep up their strength. There is very general concurrence of opinion, says Jennings, that the aversion to food that characterizes all cases of acute disease, which is fully in proportion to the severity of the symptoms, is one of nature's blunders that require the intervention of art, and hence enforced feeding regardless of aversion. Dr. Shu declared, abstinence is by far too much feared in the treatment of disease generally. We have good reason for believing that many life has been destroyed by the indiscriminate feeding which is so often practiced among the sick. In the human realm, instinct prevails only to the extent that we permit. Although one of the first things nature does to the person who, with acute disease, is to stop all desire for food, the well-meaning friends of the sick man encourage him to eat. These may bring in tasty and tempting dishes designed to please his taste and excite an appetite, but the most they ever succeed in doing is to get the patient to nibble a few bites. The ignorant physician may insist that he must eat to keep up strength, but Mother Nature, who is wiser than any doctor who ever lived, continues to say, do not eat. The man who is sick, but who is able to be about his work, complains of having lost his appetite. He no longer enjoys his food. This is because his organic instincts know that to eat is the usual way to increase the disease. The man thinks the loss of appetite is a great calamity and seeks a way to restore it. In this, he is encouraged by physicians and friends who alike erroneously think that the sick man must eat to keep up his strength. The doctors prescribe a tonic and stuffing, and of course the patient is made worse. Well, family, I'm going to stop it there. yeah, I'm gonna stop it there. But so far, I mean, I've enjoyed this book, and I hope you do too. Because, I mean, I'm sorry if people were offended because it's not scripture studies. But well, first, I don't only do scripture readings. I leave scripture studies up to young man. That's not me. That's him. No, I stay in my lane. But I just think so many people have come to me about fasting, and I just thought that this was a good idea. And it's not for everybody, but for those that, it's good for. I'm glad that, that you found value in this. And I love you guys. And tomorrow, if I'm able to, I'm going to go earlier in the day and reading this so I can get back to Ezekiel tomorrow night. So I love you guys, and I hope everyone's having a Baruch evening. Shalom, family. Love you.